Hi everyone, welcome back to True Crime Echoes. Tonight I want to take you on a journey that isn't just about crime, but about the mysteries that linger in the shadows of everyday life. This story comes from a small town in Georgia where one young girl's imaginary friends turned out to be anything but imaginary. What started as innocent play in the backyard quickly spiraled into one of the most chilling hauntings ever recorded in American history. As we walk through this case together, I encourage you to keep an open mind. Whether you believe in spirits or not, the experiences of the Wyrick family will make you question what's possible and what might be waiting in the dark corners of your own home. Chapter 1: A Small Town. Beginning. When I think of haunting stories, my mind always drifts back to the ones that don't happen in some ancient castle or a faraway land, but in places that feel ordinary, even comforting. That's what makes them stick, and today's story is one of those. It begins in a quiet little town in Georgia, the kind of place where life is supposed to be safe and simple. Ellerslie, Georgia wasn't much on the map back in the late 1980s. It was the kind of small community where people went to church on Sundays, went fishing or hunting on weekends, and waved to their neighbors because everyone either knew each other or at least recognized a familiar face. The population was barely over 3,000, which meant that any new family stood out. And in 1989, one such family arrived, hoping to start fresh. Their names were Andrew and Lisa Wyrick, along with their little 3-year-old daughter Heidi. They were young, full of optimism, and ready to put down roots. They had just purchased their very first home, a modest ranch-style house, with enough space to grow into, and a backyard where their little girl could play. For Lisa, especially, this felt like the beginning of something stable, something she had dreamed of. The Wyricks moved to Ellerslie because they wanted that small-town life. They wanted safety, predictability, and a sense of community. It's the kind of decision many young parents make: move away from the bustle, find a quiet spot where their children can grow up without fear. And at first glance, everything about Ellerslie seemed to promise exactly that. But as we know in true crime and true haunting stories, appearances can be deceiving. The house seemed charming, ordinary even, but it didn't take long for the Wyricks to realize that something was just a little off. You know that feeling when you move into a new place and the silence feels heavier than it should? Or when you swear you notice small things you can't explain, but you tell yourself it's nothing. Lisa felt that from the start, though she brushed it aside. Looking back, it's almost eerie how normal those first weeks seemed. A happy young family settling into their first home, chasing the dream of peace and security. None of them could have imagined that this house in this tiny Georgia town would become the center of one of the most chilling paranormal stories in modern America. Chapter 2: An Imaginary Friend. Most parents will tell you that imaginary friends are normal. They show up in childhood, fade away with time, and usually don't raise too many alarms. But for the Wyrick family, what started as something innocent quickly became something far stranger. Soon after settling into their new home, little Heidi began talking about someone she called her new friend. At 3 years old, it didn't strike Lisa or Andrew as anything unusual. Kids make up friends all the time, and after a big move, it even made sense that Heidi would lean on her imagination for comfort. But Lisa noticed something different. Heidi didn't just chatter here and there, she held long, full conversations, pausing as if she were listening, nodding as though someone really was speaking back. Lisa would watch her daughter in the backyard smiling and talking to the empty air. At first, she chalked it up to a vivid imagination. But then she asked the obvious question, "Heidi, who are you talking to?" And that's when things shifted. Heidi didn't describe a little girl or a playful cartoon-like character. Instead, she spoke of an old man. She said his name was Mr. Gordy. She said he wore a black suit and a top hat, and that he liked to play with her in the yard or in her room. That detail alone unsettled Lisa. Most children invent friends who look like themselves, other children may be animals. But an old man in a suit, that wasn't typical. And Heidi wasn't vague, she gave specifics. She said Mr. Gordy held her hand when they went for walks. Lisa even swore she saw her daughter walking down the sidewalk one afternoon, her small hand lifted, clasped in the air like she was holding on to someone invisible. As much as Lisa wanted to dismiss it, there was something about the certainty in Heidi's voice that made it impossible to ignore. This wasn't just play. To Heidi, Mr. Gordy was real. And that was only the beginning. Chapter 3. The Man at the Door. One afternoon, not long after Heidi had grown comfortable talking about her friend Mr. Gordy, something happened that shook Lisa in a way she couldn't brush off. The doorbell rang. Lisa was in the kitchen preparing lunch, so Heidi, being curious, went to the front door. When she came back into the kitchen, she looked up at her mom and said something no parent wants to hear. "Mom, there's a man at the door. His shirt is covered in blood." Lisa froze. At first, she thought her daughter was making up another story, just another imaginary friend like Mr. Gordy. But the look on Heidi's face was different. It wasn't playful or distant. She seemed dead serious. Lisa rushed to the door, flung it open, and no one was there. No bloody shirt, no injured stranger, just an empty front porch and the sound of the quiet street. Trying to stay calm, Lisa asked Heidi again, who was at the door. The little girl repeated, "His name is Khan. He's hurt." Heidi described him in detail, an older man with an injured hand, blood-staining his shirt. Panic set in. Lisa wasn't just worried about ghosts or imaginary figures anymore. She feared there might actually be a dangerous man wandering their neighborhood, someone who had tried to lure her daughter out. She immediately called Andy at work, and together they searched the streets around the house, checking every yard, every corner. They found nothing. No footprints, no blood, no trace of anyone named Khan. Still, Heidi stuck to her story. She insisted the man was real, that he had spoken to her, and that he wasn't just passing by, he had come to their house specifically. For Lisa, this was the moment the unease grew into genuine fear. Mr. Gordy might have been brushed off as a harmless quirk of a child's imagination, but this felt different. Whoever Khan was, Heidi believed in him completely. And soon the family would discover that Khan, or perhaps Lon, had a history tied to their very home. Chapter 4. Discovering the Past. Lisa couldn't shake the image of the bloody man at the door. Even after days had passed, she replayed Heidi's words in her head. His name is Khan. It was the kind of thing that eats at you, especially when you have a young child in the house. Was there someone lurking around, or was this another strange twist in Heidi's so-called imaginary world? It was around this time that Lisa's sister, Joyce, moved into the house next door. Having family so close brought Lisa some comfort, and naturally, she confided in Joyce about everything Heidi's friend, Mr. Gordy, the mysterious bloody man, and the unsettling sense that something wasn't right inside the home. Joyce listened carefully and then suggested something that seemed so simple but had never crossed Lisa's mind. "Why don't we find out who lived in your house before you?" Maybe she reasoned these names and faces Heidi kept bringing up weren't random at all. So Joyce took it upon herself to call the real estate agent who had sold Lisa the house. The answer she got was chilling. A man named James Gordy had once owned the home. He had been a real estate investor in Columbus, Georgia, but he'd died back in 1974, long before Heidi was even born. Joyce felt her stomach drop when she heard the name. Gordy, Mr. Gordy. She rushed to tell Lisa, who was equally stunned. How could a 3-year-old know that name, let alone describe the man in detail? Lisa decided to confirm the story herself. She reached out to the previous homeowner, a woman named Kelly, who came over to the house with old photographs of her family. She spread them out on the table, and Lisa gently asked Heidi if she recognized anyone. Without hesitation, Heidi pointed to one picture. "That's Khan," she said confidently. But Kelly looked closely and shook her head. "No, sweetheart. That's Lon. My uncle. He lost his hand in a cotton gin accident years ago. And he died in 1957. The bloodied shirt, the injured hand, the missing limb. Heidi hadn't invented these men. She was seeing people tied directly to the house's past, people who weren't alive anymore. Chapter 5. The First Disturbances. After the shocking realization that Heidi's friends had once been real people, Lisa and Andy hoped things might calm down. Maybe they thought these spirits, if that's what they were harmless. But the house itself soon began to change its tone. Andy came up with an idea he thought might help shift the energy in the home: a dog. Kids loved dogs, and maybe a playful puppy could keep Heidi distracted. keep her busy with something alive and tangible. When they surprised her with the small pup, her joy was instant. For a brief moment, it felt like things might actually return to normal. But animals, as many people believe, are sensitive to things humans can't see. The Wyrick's dog didn't last long in the home before it began showing signs of fear. In the evenings, or sometimes in the middle of the day, the dog would suddenly stop in its tracks, its ears pricking up. Then, without warning, it would growl at an empty corner of the room or bark wildly at the dark hallway. Lisa would watch the animal's fur bristle standing on end as if it were facing a threat. Yet there was nothing there, no intruder, no sound, just shadows. One night while Heidi and a friend were playing on the living room floor, Lisa sat nearby on the couch trying to relax. Out of nowhere, the chair across from her scraped against the floor and turned toward them as though someone invisible had pulled it up to join the conversation. Lisa froze. The kids went silent. The dog barked furiously at the chair. When she told Andy later, he tried to stay calm. "It's probably nothing." "Don't let it get to you," he said. But deep down, Lisa knew he had no real explanation either. The disturbances grew stranger, kitchen cabinets opening and closing on their own, cold drafts sweeping through rooms with no windows open, shadows where there should be none. The house was no longer just a home. It was becoming a stage for something unseen, and it wasn't the gentle company of Mr. Gordy anymore. Chapter 6. Voices in the Dark. Lisa tried her best to brush off the small disturbances, doors, creaking chairs, shifting the dog's outbursts, but nights in the house became unbearable. After putting Heidi to bed, she and Andy would retreat to their room, trying to keep life as normal as possible. But once Andy fell asleep, Lisa was left alone in the quiet. It started with faint sounds above her head, muffled at first, like shuffling in the attic. She told herself it was probably an animal, maybe a squirrel or raccoon. But when she lay perfectly still and listened harder, the sounds grew clearer. These weren't footsteps. They were voices. Deep, low voices whispering. At first she couldn't make out the words, but then she heard something that made her blood run cold, her own name. Whispered again and again, just above her bed. Lisa pulled the covers tight against her chest, praying Andy would wake up. But he slept soundly oblivious. Every night the whispers returned, surrounding her in the darkness, filling her with dread. She began to lose sleep, her nerves fraying from the constant fear of lying in her bed while someone hovered just beyond the ceiling. When she finally confided in her pastor, hoping for comfort, his words only deepened her fear. "Ghosts aren't real," he said firmly. "But demons are." He suggested that what Lisa was hearing might not be lost souls at all, but darker forces preying on her family. That thought consumed her, demons whispering her name in the night, watching her as she tried to rest. As days turned into weeks, the voices didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. Sometimes she swore she heard laughter between the whispers. Other times she felt as though the air in the room thickened, pressing down on her chest, daring her to breathe. Lisa wanted desperately to believe that this was all her imagination. But when she saw Heidi one morning, wide-eyed and trembling, saying she had felt something bad in her room, Lisa realized it wasn't just in her head. The house wasn't just haunted, it was under siege. Chapter 7. The Dark Figure. For years, Heidi's conversations with Mr. Gordy had been innocent, even comforting. But one day, her tone changed. She came to her parents pale and frightened and whispered, "There's something else in my room. Something bad." She called it the Dark Figure. Unlike Mr. Gordy, who seemed gentle, this presence had no face. Heidi described it as a tall, shadowy shape that hovered in the corners of her room. Whenever it appeared, she said the temperature dropped so suddenly that she could see her breath in the air. At first, Lisa thought Heidi was just having nightmares. But the terror in her daughter's eyes said otherwise. Then the physical signs began. One evening, Heidi ran out of her room, sobbing, clutching her head. She told her mother that something had pulled her hair hard. Another time she said she had been pinched by invisible fingers. Lisa was shaken. Was this really happening to her child? Things escalated quickly. One morning, Lisa found 3 long scratches across Heidi's face. They were deep enough to leave welts, yet Heidi had been alone in her bed. Andy brushed it off, suggesting she might have done it in her sleep. But the explanation crumbled when days later Andy himself woke up in pain. Lifting his shirt, he revealed fresh scratches carved across his side marks, too straight, too violent to be accidental. For 4 nights in a row, Andy suffered similar attacks. Scratches appeared on his skin, without explanation always, while he slept. When Heidi looked at him, she didn't hesitate. "It's the dark figure," she said. "It's hurting you." Lisa's heart sank. Whatever this presence was, it wasn't content with frightening them anymore. It was now leaving its mark, physically invading their lives. The whispers in the night were terrifying enough, but scratches on her husband and child, that was proof Lisa couldn't ignore. Their home wasn't just haunted, it was becoming dangerous. Chapter 8: Seeking Answers. By 1994, the Wyrick family had reached their breaking point. With Heidi's younger sister Jordan now in the house, Lisa and Andy couldn't ignore the danger anymore. Their daughter wasn't just seeing shadows, she was being scratched, attacked, and terrified in her own bedroom. And Andy himself had the marks to prove it. Desperate, they reached out to Dr. William Roll, a parapsychologist with years of experience studying the paranormal. He wasn't some sensationalist looking for a story. He was a respected researcher. When he arrived at their home, he wanted to test Heidi directly. He brought along several photographs, a mix of random strangers and one photo of James Gordy, the man Heidi had claimed as her friend. Without hesitation, Heidi picked out Mr. Gordy's picture. "That's him," she said with the certainty of a child who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Doctor?" Roll considered the possibility that Heidi might be hallucinating or that her imagination was unusually vivid. But even he admitted he couldn't explain the scratches that kept appearing on her and Andy. He left without giving the family clear answers, only more questions. Not long after, the Wyricks invited a psychic to the home. This woman had no prior information about the family, yet the moment she stepped inside, she confirmed what Heidi had been saying for years. She sensed a protective spirit, likely Mr. Gordy, watching over Heidi. But she also felt something darker. In fact, she said there were 3 negative entities lurking in the house. Her words sent chills through Lisa. 3, one of them, the psychic claimed, had no face and lingered around Heidi specifically. Still unsatisfied, the family sought out a second psychic. This time the message was the same. There were demonic presences in the home. One was drawn to Jordan's room, another lingered in Heidi's, and the third drifted between the living room and the parents' bedroom, often above their bed. The psychic told them something even more disturbing: their fireplace was an active portal, a gateway for spirits to move between worlds. For the Wyricks, the question was no longer if their house was haunted. It was how long they could survive living in it. Chapter 9: The Breaking Point. By now, the Wyricks were living in constant fear. The whispers, the scratches, the shadows, they had become part of their daily lives. But nothing prepared them for the night Heidi screamed so loud it shook the entire house. Lisa and Andy rushed into her bedroom and froze at what they saw. Heidi was suspended in the air, her small body dangling upside down as though something invisible had grabbed her by the feet. She thrashed and sobbed, begging her parents to help. Andy lunged forward and pulled her down, and the moment he touched her, the presence let go. The family stood there, shaken to the core. It was no longer about mysterious noises or strange sightings. Something in that house had physically lifted their daughter into the air. That was the moment Lisa knew they couldn't stay. In the days that followed, the activity only intensified. Cold drafts swept through the halls even on warm afternoons. Doors slammed without warning. Andy felt watched constantly, like someone was standing inches behind him. And Heidi, though brave, admitted she couldn't sleep without the lights on, terrified the faceless figure would return. Lisa confided in her sister Joyce, who had witnessed some of the disturbances herself. They both agreed whatever lived in that house wasn't going anywhere. The family's pastor had already tried cleansing the home, but the activity hadn't stopped. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger afterward. So the Wyricks made the most difficult decision: they put the house up for sale. Lisa later admitted she felt guilty knowing someone else would eventually live there, but her priority was her children's safety. No amount of denial or faith could erase what she had seen with her own eyes. When they finally left, Lisa said she prayed the dark presence would stay behind. But even after moving, the experience followed them in ways she couldn't have imagined. Heidi still saw spirits, both kind and terrifying. And the memory of that night, the night her daughter was lifted into the air by something unseen, haunted Lisa for the rest of her life. Chapter 10. Life After the Haunting. Leaving the house in Ellerslie brought the Wyrick family some relief, but it didn't end their story. For Heidi, the spirits never truly went away. She grew up still seeing figures that no one else could see, some benevolent, others terrifying. It became part of her reality, a burden she never asked for, but one she couldn't escape. As Heidi got older, she came to believe that Mr. Gordy had been more than just a ghostly friend. She saw him as a guardian of sorts, someone who had appeared in her childhood to prepare her for the strange, lifelong connection she had to the spirit world. But even with his presence, the darker entities were never far behind. The family's haunting caught the attention of reporters and paranormal investigators. One journalist who visited their home before they moved out described feeling such an overwhelming sense of dread that he left without even finishing his interview. Their story spread through the small town and beyond, making Heidi something of a local legend, and unfortunately, a target for gossip. People questioned her honesty, some calling her gifted, others accusing her of making it all up. For a child, that kind of scrutiny was almost as damaging as the haunting itself. As the years passed, Heidi went to college, got married, and started a family of her own. But the experiences didn't fade with time. She continued to sense spirits in everyday life, sometimes peaceful presences, other times dark shadows that left her shaken. She admitted that she could never quite put into words the things she had seen. They were too strange, too far outside what most people would believe. The Wyrick haunting became one of the most famous ghost stories in Georgia. It inspired television specials, documentaries, and even films like A Haunting in Georgia and The Haunting in Connecticut 2: Ghosts of Georgia. Yet for Heidi and her family, it was never just a story. It was their life marked by fear, mystery, and encounters that defy easy explanation. To this day, Heidi maintains that what happened in her childhood home was real. And the question lingers for the rest of us: was the Wyrick family cursed chosen, or simply witnesses to something beyond human understanding? And that brings us to the end of the haunting tale of the Wyrick family. What began with a 3-year-old girl chatting with her friend Mr. Gordy unfolded into decades of paranormal encounters, violent attacks, and questions that science still can't fully answer. Do you believe Heidi's story? Was she truly gifted with a connection to the spirit world? Or could this all be explained in another way? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on True Crime Echoes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who loves a good haunting. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't explain.